This is the Ross Kaminsky Show. Now, Ross Kaminsky on Denver's talk station, 630 KHOW.
Good morning, everybody. Happy Wednesday. Let's not waste any time. Straight to our VIP lines. We are joined again by Congressman Jason Crow, Democrat representing Colorado's 6th congressional district, of which I am a resident. Good morning, Jason. Are you in D.C. or Colorado today?
Good morning, Ross. I'm in D.C. this morning, unfortunately.
Unfortunately, just checking. I figured you were, because otherwise, I thought you might be here in studio with us. So I wanted to just start before we get to politics and policy and all of that. I personally have a theory about airplanes, which is that when one is not on the ground, when an airplane is not on the ground, a person who is in it should generally stay in it. But you decided to have a different attitude a couple of weeks ago.
Well, Ross, if you had seen the airplane that I was jumping out of, you may have had a different view on that theory. It was a World War II era C-47, and when the engine was starting up on the airfield, it sounded like your grandfather's old lawnmower. And I'm thinking to myself, just get me out of this plane at the earliest possible moment.
So where were you? What were you doing, and who'd you do it with?
So I was really honored to be a part of the delegation that went over for the 75th anniversary of D-Day. So it was a bipartisan delegation, Republicans and Democrats from Congress that went over. We participated in the remembrance ceremony with the president and other members of the administration. And then a friend of mine, actually a Republican from Florida, Mike Waltz, and I, who were both in a caucus of combat veterans, decided to do a jump. You know, we're both former paratroopers. He's actually a former Green Beret. I'm a former Army Ranger, as you know. And we decided to honor the paratroopers that made that same jump 75 years ago by doing it and hopefully drawing attention to that sacrifice and just the magnitude of what they did that day.
What was it like, separate from jumping out of the plane, which sounds kind of crazy to me, but I guess if the plane was rickety, you're probably better getting out. Just briefly, what was it like being there for the 75th anniversary of D-Day, in particular your perspective as a serviceman, being around these veterans who fought on those beaches 75 years ago?
It's very emotional for me and for most people when I go there. The walk at American Military Cemetery above Omaha Beach and to look at the crosses of the 18, 19, 20-year-old soldiers that died on the beaches just a couple hundred yards below 75 years ago. These were young men from farms in Colorado and all over the U.S. That never came home. And they did this because they loved the country. They believed in duty and service and sacrifice. They were more than just words, and they gave their life for it. And it's to draw attention to that enormous sacrifice and to walk among those graves and to just tell that story again. Because frankly, I think it's something that we don't talk enough about, the idea of service and duty to country. It's something that I think we need to talk more about. To be able to tell that story was really meaningful for me.
I can only imagine. Literally, I can only imagine. I haven't served in the military, and I wasn't there on the 75th anniversary, but it must have been an incredibly moving day. Let's move on to some other things. You are becoming part of something in Congress called the Civility Caucus. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, I just joined the Civility Caucus with another friend of mine from Congress that I've gotten to know over the last 6 months or so, Troy Balderson from Ohio. He's a Republican. He's actually the ranking member on the subcommittee that I chair. I'm the chair of a subcommittee on small business, and he's the ranking Republican member, and we've kind of struck up a friendship. The Civility Caucus is what's known as a Noah's Ark caucus, where you have to join 2 by 2. You have to, it's one Republican, one Democrat. So Troy and I joined the other week, and it's just based on this idea that we might have policy differences, we disagree on a number of things, but we both believe that we were sent to Congress to try to find common ground, to find where can we work together, where can we find ways to work and kind of improve the lives of people in our district. So Troy and I joined, and there are other members, and we're just going to work hard on being respectful. And we obviously have areas of disagreement, but we're going to try to treat each other well in the process and figure out how we can work together.
I wonder if you might be able to name one or two policy areas right now, important policy areas, where you see any potential bipartisan support in Congress. Yeah,
well, we did some work a couple of weeks ago to reduce the cost of prescription drugs. There's actually a growing interest in a broader national service movement. So I belong to another caucus that's very similar to the Civility Caucus, and it's again bipartisan. Half Democrats, half Republicans. All veterans of the military, and we're working on national service. This idea that we can kind of rebuild civility and respect and love of country and community through public service and national service. So we're working on trying to figure out, well, what does that look like? How do we expand national service, for young folks, between 18 and their, mid to the early 20s, and get them out serving the community? Because, you look at the fact that we're at an all-time low right now in Congress for the number of people that have served in the military. And I just can't help but think that that's one of the drivers behind the lack of civility and the vitriol that we see, because people just don't have that common background. So we're working on that national service piece.
That'll be interesting. When you have more details, we'll talk about it more. Every once in a while I hear stuff come up like, join AmeriCorps and we'll forgive your college debt or something like that, and I'm quite against that sort of quid pro quo for it, but we'll see when you've got more specifics. I wanted to move on to another thing. I saw a piece, I don't remember what publication it was in, about you supporting a bill that would establish or liability or eliminate a block of the liability for gun manufacturers if somebody uses a gun to commit a crime. And it troubles me a lot, that line of thinking, and I wanted to ask you about it.
Yeah, so the bill that I proposed last week, along with several of my colleagues, all it does is treat gun manufacturers and the gun industry the same as we treat every other industry. It is really rare. The gun manufacturing industry is really rare in that over a decade ago, Congress passed immunity for the industry. So, if they sell the faulty products or sell them in a faulty way, they are immune from liability in the same way that, a lawnmower company or a chainsaw company or, any other kind of manufacturer of a high-risk product might be. And that just doesn't seem right to me, that they should be immune from that type of liability, and people that are trying to seek redress in the courts can't do it. So it just kind of resets it and says, if the gun industry does something wrong, that they have to be held accountable for it.
Okay, so first you mentioned faulty product. I can't remember the last time I heard about a gun being faulty in a way that we normally think about a faulty product. So then you mentioned sold in a faulty way. What does that mean?
Yeah, so you look at the Aurora Theater shooting, right, where that disturbed man was able to buy 4,000 rounds of ammunition without any ID, without any background check. And I feel like that ammo manufacturers should be responsible for that type of thing. So, just like a lot of other products, tobacco products, for example, you can't sell to people under 18, can't market to people under 18. The tobacco industry and big tobacco have been held accountable for that. They had to pay back to the community for the public health consequences of those marketing tactics, those sales tactics, and the dangers of their product. The gun industry is immune from that same type of responsibility and liability, and I think they should be treated the same as everybody else.
But there's a big difference. The gun industry is not marketing to kids. They're not trying to sell their product to people for whom it would be illegal to own. So it's quite different from tobacco. It sounds like tell me if I'm wrong here, but the real goal, it seems to me, and this isn't from you, this isn't solely from you, this issue's been around for a while, is that people want to be able to sue gun manufacturers when somebody buys a gun and does something bad with it. But how could that possibly be the gun manufacturer's fault in general? And then even more specifically, the manufacturer sells it to a distributor who sells it to a store who sells it to an end user. If somebody drives drunk, should we be able to sue the car manufacturer or even the alcohol manufacturer? I don't think anybody thinks that would be right.
Now, you look at every other industry, and there have been advances in safety for different products, from cars to even toy guns. The toy guns have more regulation and protections in place than real guns do. The fact that you have little orange caps on the end of them now, other kind of protective measures to make sure people don't mistake those for real guns. There have been advanced chainsaws. There are safety mechanisms in chainsaws now for kickbacks and table saws, that now stop if someone puts their finger in there. There have been advances made in safety for products in a wide variety of industries because of liability in the past, and it's made people safer. But those advances have not been made in the gun industry because they have no incentive. There's no liability. They're completely immune. So the same products that they sold, 10, 20, 30 years ago, the same products that they're selling now. There are safety mechanisms available, for the gun industry that if they had an incentive to do it, could make the product safer.
I get that, and I'm going to move on from this topic. I get that, but I still don't think that addresses the actual point that I made, which is that I think the real goal of this is to allow someone who's the victim of a gun crime to sue the gun manufacturer, even though that doesn't make sense, and we wouldn't allow it in any other case. But
and just to put a fine point on it, we do allow that in other cases. And you're kind of a libertarian guy, Ross. So why should one industry be protected when others aren't?
Because
why do we treat that one industry very different from other industries? I'm looking at a level playing field here. I feel like you should treat the gun industry and manufacturers the same way as we treat everybody else. I think this is an equity issue.
I get that, but the real world doesn't treat the gun industry the same as everybody else, because there are people out there who want to sue the gun industry, who want to sue the manufacturer for something that somebody did with their product, and you simply, I can't think of other times, at least in any kind of large scale, where you see this with other industries. Mm-hmm. I mean, you simply don't see people suing a car manufacturer because somebody drove too fast and killed somebody. And that's what people want to do with guns. But let's move on to some other things. You've got coming up in Congress some pretty big conversations about budget and debt ceilings. And right now it seems like you've got Republicans negotiating among themselves between the Senate and the Trump administration, and they're still trying to figure that out. What do you think is going to happen when it gets to the House? And do you think that the House would go along with more than $0 of funding for a border wall if that's what comes out of the Senate?
Well, there is undoubtedly a big challenge coming up. The negotiators for the White House and for the Senate and for the House are in discussions right now, today and yesterday and throughout the rest of the week. We have to strike a deal here. We have to figure out a way to raise the budget caps and the debt ceiling so we don't default on our obligations. I just last week passed with other members of the Armed Services Committee the National Defense Authorization Act. This is the $733 billion DOD budget that gives a 3% increase in pay for our soldiers, funds really important programs, construction at our bases, purchases important systems that we need to be safe and to compete with our adversaries across the world. If we don't strike a deal, then all of that is at risk. We just can't allow that to happen. So, there has to be a deal. I would highly recommend that the president and others back off of their drive for border wall funding. There's the same dynamics that were responsible for the shutdown back in January that I know we've talked about before. Those dynamics haven't changed. There's no will for that type of funding and for that wall. There's a will for a lot of other things, and certainly pay increases for our troops are one of them. And we have to get a deal done.
But just very specifically, do you think a Democratic majority in the House would go along with a deal that includes more than $0 for a border wall? What's your guess?
Well, like we've talked about before, also, it depends what you mean on kind of border security and a border wall.
Right.
Our party is for strong border security, surveillance technology, technologies that are ports of entry, drug-sniffing dogs.
I get all that. I mean a physical barrier.
Yeah, I think, again, the dynamics haven't changed since January.
Okay, so probably not.
Appetite.
Interesting.
There's very little appetite for that.
Okay. And I want to ask you one last question. It's more philosophical than anything. And this is the question that I've gotten from my listeners more than any other whenever we talk. And that is, they find it difficult to understand, and I'm in this camp a little bit myself, how an Army Ranger is as liberal as you are. I don't know if you've heard that question before, and I know it sounds a little funny, but my listeners really wonder. And I wonder if you could just, give us a really personal answer for, we've got a little more than a minute or so here.
Well, I don't really buy into those labels, Ross. I think I represent the community. I know people like to label someone on the political spectrum,
Mm-hmm.
but when it comes down to it, I think I reflect the politics of the community, from making sure that we have sensible immigration reform, to protecting small businesses, to growing small businesses, to making sure we're advocating for our local Air Force base, to having a strong national defense, to protecting health care and pre-existing conditions. These are not liberal or conservative things. These are kitchen table issues that people in our community are struggling with and dealing with every day. Republicans and Democrats. Liberals and conservatives, however you want to label them.
So you would kind of reject the label liberal as applied to you?
I don't like labels generally, because I think that they mean different things to different people.
Okay, and I'll tell you what, because I'm almost out of time, I want to follow up on something you said for a moment, back to policy just for a sec. I've literally got 30 seconds. Do you think Democrats in the House would go along with immigration reform that includes changes to asylum and stuff like this? Because Trump is really running against the Dems as doing nothing on this issue.
Well, we're doing a lot on the issue. The president is creating a crisis at the border. He's creating another crisis in the last 24 hours by saying he's going to do, mass immigration enforcement and deportations. These are folks in our community, our neighbors, our friends, our coworkers that have, in many instances, have been here for years. He's creating this crisis while we're sitting here at the table trying to figure out a path forward. How do we actually have strong border security? How do we have a pathway to citizenship and permanent residency for those who haven't committed crimes, who have been here doing the right thing, building lives, being responsible? We're working on a plan. We're ready to deal. The question is the president ready to actually work in good faith and just not blow things up on Twitter all the time? It's very hard to deal with somebody from one day to the next when his position is constantly changing. Infrastructure is a great deal, Ross, or a good example. We're ready to go on infrastructure. You know me. I want to build roads and bridges and sewer lines and water lines. I love to see people in hard hats rebuilding America and doing work in our community. I was ready to go on a huge infrastructure deal, and then he just blows it up.
Yeah. What's funny, and I got to go here, Jason, but gosh, I was happy that got blown up. $2 trillion of spending. I just shoo. Thank God that's over, at least for now. Congressman Jason Crow, representing Colorado 6. Thanks for being here, as always. You can get on with your day job now.
All right. Thanks, Ross. Good to talk with you.
You too.
All right. Take care.
All right. We'll tell you what. We'll be right back from the It Couldn't Happen to a Nicer Guy files. So many feel-good stories lately of bad guys losing bigly. I got one for you next.